Got it, I think.
We are now
I
being.
love that picture behind you.
Thank you. That was something that Ray had. I hate to use the word because it sounds way more than actually what it costs, but commissioned it from an artist out of New Orleans, where we love it. So it's one of the things that actually fit when I moved.
There's Mary Pat. Okay.
Oh,
So,
good.
All right. So we're good to go, Eric?
We are good to go when you are. So, and I'll just kind of follow along with the PowerPoint.
Okay.
And we can make a signal or something like.
Okay.
Perfect. All right. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Donna Helsel, and I'm the education chair for NAMI Greater Orlando. And this is our first virtual NAMIGO Talks. And I'm really excited about this topic, especially since May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And the first week in May is Children's Mental Health Awareness. So this just fits right into there, and really excited about this topic of talking to children and teens about emotions and mental health using books, and good looking stuff coming ahead. So let me introduce you first to Dr. Monique Simpson. You want to give a wave so they can see who you are? She currently is a child and adolescent psychiatrist at Amistad Behavioral Health here in Orlando, and brings with her a wealth of experience in both adult and child psychiatry. Dr. Simpson has several clinical interests and is particularly passionate about education and decreasing stigma around mental health and substance abuse. She has enjoyed being a partner with NAMI, other community organizations, and prides herself in providing honest communication and evidence-based interventions for families and patients. Passionate about using technology, so we're glad we have this opportunity tonight, and use telepsychiatry as a unique opportunity to increase access to care in underserved areas. So I think this topic is very pertinent in these very uncertain times that we're living in now. So thank you, Dr. Simpson, for leading the charge on this.
Yeah, and thank you guys for having me, as well as my other colleagues. So let's skip a few slides ahead, so that I can introduce my co-presenters. So this is our agenda for the day. Hopefully we'll be early, possibly have more time for discussions and questions, but if not, I gave us a nice buffer so that hopefully we'll definitely be able to address things. That's my bio and my picture. Rocking the curly hair today though. And not a suit. And then next up is Dr. Phelps. So Dr. Jane Phelps-Tschang, she currently lives and works in Spokane, Washington. Jane, if you want to wave so that we can see you. So really interesting about Jane, she had a prior life as an art historian before becoming a psychiatrist. So she completed medical school at the University of Pittsburgh, School of Medicine, and that's also where she did her training in psychiatry, and where we met. Actually, we were in the same class for both adult and child psychiatry. She also did additional training while she was there in community psychiatry, which was a fellowship we did together, and psychodynamic psychotherapy at the Pittsburgh Psychoanalytic Institute, which we did not do together. Academically, she's really interested in medical student and resident education, and actually they've just opened up a brand new training program and gotten approval for child psych fellowship in Spokane. And clinically, she is very interested in anxiety, OCD, trauma-informed care, family work, as well as community psychiatry. And of course, part of how we came up with this presentation together is because she also has a special interest in improving children's emotional literacy through the use of storybooks. She actually volunteers, and she can speak more to that probably in the question and answer section. She volunteers at one of her kids' schools to teach emotional literacy. So that's really exciting. And then Dr. Tumuluru, everyone at University of Pittsburgh calls her Dr. T. She's the medical director of Western Psychiatric Hospital's Adolescent Acute Partial Hospitalization Program, as well as an attending psychiatrist in the Merck Child Outpatient Clinic, and that's our Autism Spectrum Disorder Clinic. and she works at University of Pittsburgh. She's a committed educator and mentor, and Dr. T is highly involved with the residents, fellows, as well as medical students, and she's always trying to help mentor the next generation of child and adolescent psychiatrists. And then we're really fortunate to have Erin. Erin E. Moulton is the author of middle grade and young adult novels, including Flutter, Tracing Stars, Chasing the Milky Way, and Keepers of the Labyrinth. She also edited an anthology about sexual assault called Things We Haven't Said, Sexual Violence Survivors Speak Out. She's currently the teen librarian at the Derry Public Library in New Hampshire. So you've got folks from all over today joining you. One of the benefits of technology. And when she isn't writing or editing, she can be found teaching writers of all ages and working at the library, or co-hosting her book-loving podcast for young adults called Teen Title Talk. So that's all of us. And we're gonna start off with the objectives. So we always like to know where we're going so that at the end, hopefully we've achieved them. So at the end of this activity, we want you to be able to identify some of the developmental milestones in emotional intelligence, and then at least 3 books, probably more, that you could use to discuss emotions and mental health with children or teenagers. We want you to feel comfortable to discuss emotions in an age-appropriate and developmentally appropriate way, because age doesn't always equal developmental level. And then be able to identify at least 2, again, possibly more resources for further information on how to engage children and teens in discussing emotions and mental health. So, alrighty, so now we're going to start off the section, and I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Jane Phelps-Tschang. She's going to address some of the child emotional development. And that's ideal because she works doing child work out in Spokane. So Jane?
Sure. So hi there. I'm Dr. Phelps. Thanks so much, Monique. She and I studied together in training. And I realize that my bio doesn't say so right now. I'm a child psychiatrist at a partial hospitalization program, thanks to training of Dr. T, so that I can actually do this work. To start off with, since we were in Pittsburgh, Mr. Rogers was very much on our mind, and he taught kindness and acceptance. And given my personal interest in children's books and psychiatry, I was trying to think of a way to bring the two together. And essentially, when Mr. Rogers' movie came out, it really inspired me to think of his spirit. And so therefore, this little workshop is seek to empower parents and caregivers with the concrete skills to use in talking with children and teens about their feelings and emotions. So why is this important? Let's think about this. So children, not unsurprisingly, often struggle with identify and express their emotions. I don't know who's controlling the click. Perfect. Next click, please. And also important in engaging children in talks about emotions is really the first step that we're able to do to engage them, teaching them about emotional regulation. And I mean, I think about this as a form of primary prevention, because if they're able to talk about emotions, if they're able to regulate their emotions, maybe later on we wouldn't struggle as much with depression, anxiety, so forth and so on, the various things that we do see in our clinics. And as for why children's books, well, children and children's books kind of come naturally together, right? They're very natural and familiar. And so the piece that's unfamiliar to them is really to introduce the concept of emotion and how we should do it. And also, we know this from studies that attachment is incredibly important between a child and their primary attachment figure. And the process of reading a book is in itself a process of promoting attachment. And also we're teaching them language and skills and so forth and so on. So all good things. And particularly what I like about children's books is that, or actually any other fictional novel, is that this is an imagined world. So it's really safe, and it's safe using an imagined world to talk about something that may be a little bit dangerous or a little bit difficult in mental health. which all of this brings us to emotional intelligence. What exactly are we talking about when we use this term? So I'm going to give you a little bit of history buff. You heard that I was an art historian, so I'm going to give you a little bit of history, okay? So next slide. Anybody seen this book before? You might have seen it. This was really, really popular in the mid 1990s. I think I first saw this book when I was in high school. So this was a popular concept in the 1990s, and it was popularized by the author Daniel Goleman. And then in studies and literature, you'll also see other terms really thrown around to talk about this, like EQ, emotional quotient, EL, emotional literacy, EC for emotional competency, social emotional awareness, there's no acronym for that, thank goodness, social and emotional learning, SEL. So essentially what you know is that we get the sense that this is important in a lot of different studies. They use a lot of different things to describe it. But today I'm just going to use the term emotional intelligence. If you do read more literature into this, now you know that there are lots of different terms. And essentially we're all referring to very similar things. So what is it anyhow? So emotional intelligence is actually a term that was initially coined by Salovey and Mayer in 1990 in their seminal paper called Emotional Intelligence. And it's defined as the ability to monitor one's own and others' emotions and to discriminate among them and to use the information to guide one's thinking and actions. So what does it actually mean? So Goleman, according to Goleman, he divides it up into 5 separate domains. There is step, we have to be self-aware. We have to be able to, so self-aware of our emotions, able to self-regulate our emotions. We need to have some motivation to actually do both of these things. And we need to have some empathy for ourselves and for our others. And once you bring the concept of others, we also need to have the ability to do some social awareness. So EI is both not just emotional perception, but also modulate emotions in our own self and hopefully helping others to modulate as well. But it's still kind of fuzzy to me. So, but before we get to a little bit more details and a little bit more theory about different steps, how to get there, get to emotional intelligence, let me convince you that this actually matters. I'm hoping I'm talking to a group of people who we all believe that this matters, but here's the evidence, okay? So emotional intelligence is linked to improve psychological and physical health. And specifically, we care about kids, specifically in students. EI has been shown to predict success in school. If you can click to the next group of text, thank you. Predict success in school, and this was published in 2006 by Parker, and the stand-in is graduation from high school and the success of transitioning to college. Librecht actually did a study in 2014. Specifically, they look at success of medical students graduating from medical school as associated with emotional intelligence. So in other words, the more emotionally intelligent you are, the higher chance of you actually successfully finishing medical school, which is good news. And it's also associated, so EI is associated with lower test-taking anxiety, lower psychopathy. I don't love that term, but that's the term that was used in this specific paper. And psychopathy in the paper, primarily it just means any type of mental health disorders, depression, anxiety, any other disorders that we're familiar with. And this is specifically in performance-based EI measures versus like, I can actually perform, showing that I am able to have emotional intelligence versus like self-report, like I just think I'm really emotionally intelligent, but I'm not really. But here's a bit of the kicker, which I found interesting, that those with high emotional perception, which is the early steps of emotional intelligence, but without the later on advanced ability to modulate emotions, actually ends up having higher rates of depression, hopelessness, and suicidal ideation. So what it means to me is that it's not important, it's not just that we need the first half, that we can tell what our emotions are and what we can tell what other people's emotions are, but we have to figure out, we have to learn how to do something with these distressful emotions. That's also the piece that will actually help pathology, shall you say, modulation or mood modulation. Next slide, sorry. All right, so Skills of emotional competence. So this is based on a book by Sarini. It's actually an entire book. This was a PhD dissertation. She's a psychologist, published in 1999, about the development of emotional competence. And she has 8 steps to get to emotional competence. And so we're just gonna walk through one by one. First step being that we have to be aware of our own emotions. Step 2, being ability to discern, so I identify and understand other people's emotions. Step 3, able to communicate using vocabulary of emotional expression. So communication is key in here. So words and language is important. Step 4 is then we need to develop the capacity for empathic involvement in other people's emotional experiences. So empathy is also important. Not just that we're able to communicate, we're also able to really have some understanding of what other people are going through. And then step 5, now we're getting a little bit more sophisticated, right? There we should be able to differentiate between our own internal emotional experience and the way that we express emotions. We realize that that's 2 separate things. How we feel and what we show the world may be 2 separate things. And step 6 is to adaptive coping. So we need some coping skills with negative emotions and hard environment, hard situations or experiences that we go through. And step 7 is awareness of how emotional communication. So once I have a friend, how emotional communication actually affects our relationship and our friendship. And then, step 8, then you've attained capacity for emotional self-efficacy, which means that you're able to understand and manage your own emotions and whatever emotional needs that you have, as well as help others, meaning your peers or anyone else you interact with, for their own emotional efficacy as well. So I had thought that the 8 steps was a lot. I'm looking at the slides here. It's a lot. It's a bit dense. So Monique and I, when we looked at this together again, trying to think through how do we teach this, right? How can we teach this, and what are some of the developmental levels that we should want kids to achieve, and what are some of the goals that we want kids to achieve? So if we go to the next slide, we mapped it onto a developmental framework by age. Can we look at the next slide? I don't know who's controlling. Monique, are you controlling?
No.
Okay, got it.
It's Eric.
Got it. I wasn't quite sure, sorry. All right, so I'm going to step through one by one. So we're just going to go if you click through and clip all the way down, so we can have all of the pieces in there. Okay, perfect. Oh, go back. All right. So we try to make this a little bit more digestible and a little bit easier to manage. So this is for normal developing children. This is kind of our recommended targets for different skills at different age group. So 2 to 3 year olds, really the first step is to recognize their own emotional awareness and other people have emotions too. And 3 to 4 year old, they start to do more verbal skills. So not only verbal, and also identify emotions of their own and also other people's emotions. 4 to 5 year olds, really working on connecting feelings and actions and increasing emotional control. So realize that they're able to manage their emotions. And 5 to 6 year old, as they get into the stages of more social interaction, working on empathy and more complex social emotional understanding. And then 7 to 9 year old, integrating previously gained EI skills in the context of even more social interaction, because that's what early school age kiddos do. And Monique would share with you a little bit as to what happens after age 9. But this is the original framework that we had come up with. So I'm just going to step through a little bit in terms of developmental level for the kiddos, and then talk about how EI development may map onto it. So next slide, please. Perfect. So 2 to 3 year old, they're just like full of emotions. The first step is emotional awareness. So developmentally, they don't really notice that they have emotions, but they're just very, very assertive about what they want, right? And emotional intelligence wise, I would like kids to be to be aware that, there's this thing called emotions. I can feel happy, I can feel sad, and guess what? Mommy and daddy, other people can feel happy and sad too. There's this thing called emotions. And because kids at this age aren't verbalizing very much, they're just showing you what they are. This is my little one. When he was young, he obviously loved the ice cream bar. Next slide. And then we get to 3 to 4 year olds. We would like them to spend more time identify and verbalize emotions. We really want them to work on those verbal skills. Developmentally, as they're more able to communicate their emotion, it couples with fewer tantrums around 3 and 4, really depending on how fast kids run through these developmental milestones. And I always thought, oh, thank goodness they're not as tantrumy anymore. And around this age, they're more able to cooperate with others. This is just a picture of kiddos in preschool. They learned how to walk on the line. So this is cooperative, right? They have to work together. And they have to take turns. They have to learn sharing. And so in terms of emotional intelligence development, they're further practice of identify and verbalize one's own emotions using words, and increased ability to identify and verbalize other people's emotions, like you look sad, and teaching kids that smile means happy, somebody crying means sad, so forth and so on. And this also feeds into the increased ability to describe what they see in others' facial expressions and body language. And these are all skills that kids have to be taught. I mean, nobody's innate in these. And if we're conscientious about teaching these skills, it would become more innate for them. Next step. So in 4 to 5 year olds, it's about connection. It's about connection, feelings, and actions. And developmentally, 4 to 5 year olds, like, they get it. They get that there is social awareness, and they know that, like, they have friends, and some friends like them, and maybe some friends don't like them as much. And they begin to be able to tell the difference between pretend and reality, and they like fantasy play, and they can tell the difference between genders. And so in terms of EI, next slide, please. They're more able to connect feelings with actions. And so my kiddo, when he was going through this age, he would scream literally on the top of his lung to tell me that he's angry. And I said to him, I remember at this time, I said to him, like, screaming may not be a really appropriate behavior. And he looks at me and said, but it is appropriate. I'm angry. So therefore he's connecting it. But he hasn't gotten to the stage of what we talked about later, right? Just because you have an emotion doesn't mean you have to express that specific emotion. I thought that was really, really interesting that he thought he was so justified in screaming because he felt that way. So therefore, of course, it's an appropriate behavior. In this age, there's also further awareness of feelings of others, and also more control over one's own negative emotions like frustrations and anger. Okay, so next step. So developmentally, they're just getting better and better about themselves. They have increased sense of self-esteem. They're using more other methods to manage their own emotion. You may notice that kids would say, like, I'm gonna put myself in timeout because I'm mad, so forth and so on. And they're doing more and more complex and sustained cooperative play. They really do more complex pretend play. They tell a story when they do pretend play. They like rules at this stage. 5 to 6 year olds, they want the world to be a predictable place, and they want world to be operating on rules. So games with simple rules is actually really reinforcing of their sense of security about the world. And of course, this is also the age when they get really, really good at negotiating, like, eat your vegetables. And my 6-year-old would tell me, if I eat my vegetables, would I get candy afterwards? So this is what they do. They're learning this early and young. And of course, this is the age in terms of 5 to 6 year olds that we want them to work on empathy. And empathy is one of those feelings where you have to be able to put yourself in other people's shoes and appreciate other people's feelings. And as we are appreciating other people's feelings, we also start to have more understanding, working on more complex emotions, like understanding the sense of what is shame, what is embarrassment, more of these like quote unquote secondary emotions that people talk about in psychology. And then we're almost there, 7 to 9 year olds. It's all about integrating into the social context. So developmentally, they're able to problem solve independently. There's more language and more vocabulary, and they start to get the sense of like their viewpoint may be different than their parents, and it's okay. But emotional intelligence wise, next slide. Oh, okay. Oh, go back. Thank you. Emotional intelligence wise, we're integrating previously gained skills in the context even more social interaction. So now the goal is to teach them, well, if you're really, really angry, maybe you can use this breathing skill. This is my dream, right? I'm really dreaming here. I really would like kids to be able to do this. The 7 to 9 year olds really use their breathing skills, really use maybe some of their mindfulness skills. This is what I would like all kids to be able to do around this age. And as they're more able to do that for themselves, maybe they can help with their friends too, like increase ability to help regulate other people's emotions. So when they see somebody else is sad or somebody else is angry, they would make a more conscious decision as to how they're engaging other people's frustration or difficulty with emotions. Okay, so that was a lot of theory, a lot of words. We all have questions as to, so what does this actually look like on the ground when we actually do this with kids? Okay, so next slide. These are some of the things that, things that Monique and I wrote out together. This format is really taken after some of the teachings that people have done, how to teach kids about philosophy. And I took that same framework of discussion, really questioning, and really wanting to engage parents and child to actually talk about books. Because it's one thing to read a book with your child, though it's another to actually talk about the book. So this takes a bit of skill for us to not only learn as to what exactly are the different emotional targets and different objectives, different things that we want kids to learn at different age group, but then what questions to ask. So we wrote some STEM questions for a couple of the books that we picked, and the Monique, I think, can chime in and let me know. So I think these bookmarks are available online. Is that right, Monique?
Yeah, they are. And there's going to be a handout email that will provide the link to it. And there's 9 books, which will come up later. And then it'll be in the slides as well, so we can kind of talk about the themes of them. This was the book, though, that Jane read, and we took a video of her talking to her youngest at the time. Scott was, what, 3?
Yeah, he was just about to turn 3, like very, very right around that cusp.
Yeah. So we've got videos of that to kind of demonstrate it. When we did this in person, we actually got people to break out into groups and made them practice it with someone pretending to be a child at the table. I don't know how we would do that on video, so we decided to spare you that. But we've got some videos both of Jane as well as our program director, Dr. Jacobson, as she had older kids as well. Sorry, they're all boys. Nobody had girl kids. Go figure.
So just to tell you a little bit about what the setup for the bookmarks are like, on the front side, you'll see kind of the name of the book, a little bit of written about plot summary, and there is a recommended age ranges for this exercise. So in my heart, a book of feelings, the recommended age range would be for 3 to 5 year olds. And then I list out the goal of using this book. The primary skill targeted would be emotional awareness, verbalizing, identifying one's own emotions, and I'm trying to start out connecting feelings and actions. And the questions, if you flip the bookmark over on the back, is specific questions, and I think the part that I'm hoping would be particularly helpful is that you get a better sense as to when you ask a specific question, what is your goal when you ask the kids this question? Like, so have you ever felt sad, happy, blank emotion. And when was the last time that you felt this way? My goal is for them to improve their emotional awareness. And then once they tell me, the follow-up question may be, in that moment, how were you able to tell that you were feeling blank? And if a kid struggles, you might say things like, oh, is it because you're laughing? How about, you know, how can other people tell that you were feeling blank? So I really encourage them to just having more words about their more emotion. And then in terms of connecting their feelings and actions, I asked them to re-embody that emotion. Can you act it out, what that looks like? And what do you do? So not only what do you look like, but what are the things that you do? And so forth and so on. So we have 9 separate bookmarks written for different age groups. And in the next video, you'll see my little one. He didn't know, but he was engaging in this little exercise. So he was helping us out. I don't know how to make this play. Can somebody make it play?
He's gonna, yeah.
Aha. Thank you.
Yeah, on my video, on my PowerPoint, it just played, but I don't know.
Okay.
Her bad.
She's feeling bad? How can you tell she's feeling bad?
Her big heart broke.
Her big heart broke and goes boom? Is that what it says? It says, when I get really angry, my heart feels as if it's going to explode.
Yeah.
Don't come near me. My heart is yelling hot and loud. This is when my heart is mad.
Mad.
Have you ever felt mad before? When was the last time that you felt mad?
Mommy.
You felt mad at mommy? Really? What was happening that you felt mad at mommy? Oh, I didn't come back soon enough? Is that why you were mad at mommy?
Yeah, at work.
I was at work and I didn't come back soon enough and you were mad at mommy? Okay. How could you tell that you were feeling mad?
My heart popping.
Your heart was popping. You were saying boom. That's how you would.
So I'm happy to share that my child these days is still equally expressive about how I spend too much time at work, especially now that he realizes that mommy's at work and he's not at school anymore. This is really hard. COVID's hard.
Just laying on the guilt there for you.
Oh, totally laying on the guilt.
Yeah.
So, and then we have a video of Dr. Sandy Jacobson, who's our program director, doing a similar exercise with her children, Wilder, who's 6, Auden, who's 9, and it's using the same book, and she does it twice, and it's pretty interesting to watch what the reactions are with different age groups.
It's also interesting just because knowing their personalities, it really fits as well.
Yeah.
Because the younger kiddo is much more outgoing, and who is Wilder, kind of fits with his name. And then Auden, who's a little older, he's not like really, really shy and reserved, but you can tell that he's not quite as, I don't know, he's much more self-conscious of the camera, obviously. Mm-hmm. But even in his responses, I think he seemed a little more hesitant.
But he's also incredibly thoughtful, which I kind of love this.
And called him the most wild thing of all. And made him king of the wild things. How do you think Max felt as king?
Good.
Yeah? How do you know?
Because you can see in the picture.
Yeah, what do you see in the picture?
It looks like he's confident.
He does
something.
Yeah, he looks confident, doesn't he? Boy, and those monsters are responding to him well. And now, cried Max, let the wild rumpus start.
him king once, and they were frightened and called him the most wild thing of all.
Wow.
And made him king of wild things.
How do you think he feels being king?
Looks very, I don't know, humble.
Humble, yeah. What makes you think that?
He's like, it looks like he enjoys ruling them. So I'm like, yeah.
Yeah. And how do you think the wild things are responding to him?
Like they finally have like a king and they're kind of happy.
How do you think you would feel as king?
I don't know.
I might find it a little bit overwhelming. He doesn't look
Yeah.
overwhelmed at all, does he?
No, but it is.
You have to have all that attention, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, back here he looked a little nervous, right? When he first came across the ocean.
His face is like,
When that wild thing was blowing steam out his nostrils.
okay. And now, cried Max, let the wild rumpus start.
Don't put the 6-year-old to record.
The
Right.
6-year-old's filming.
And sent the wild things off to bed without their supper.
So we encourage you to try out these activities, and these are the 9 books that we've written the cards for. Llama Llama Mrs. Mama, In My Heart, A Book of Feelings, A Ball for Daisy, My Mouth Is a Volcano. That's like my personal favorite because it's really apt for my kids. Frog and Toads Are Friends, A Letter and Spring, so 2 separate stories. The Kissing Hand, Where the Wild Things Are, and Pete the Cat. These are the options that you have, and it span all the age ranges up to 9. And then we're going to pass it on to Dr. Simpson to talk a little bit about adolescent emotional development.
Yep, awesome. So, so when I made the title for this slide, I was like, emotional intelligence in teens, aka my teen is barely talking to me. We will not be reading storybooks together. Because I was like, yeah, teens are not going to sit down and read the book. Although it was nice to see because Wilder and Auden, you know, for Wilder, he wasn't reading the book, but then Auden was, and then, you know, kind of see the development. I think teens are much more apt to, if you're going to be doing this with your kids, doing it as a separate activity, and then coming together to talk about it. And so we can talk a little bit more about that. But I found this quote really interesting. It said, for all the avid readers who have been self-medicating with great books their entire lives, it comes as no surprise that reading books can be good for your mental health and your relationship with others. And this was an article in the New Yorker in 2015 talking about how adults reading books could make them feel better and have greater emotional intelligence. So next slide. So what is, and click through, just make all this stuff up there, great. So adolescence, we know, and for those of you who actually have teenagers, is a period of immense change, and it's also a period of vulnerability to mental disorders because it's a time when emotion regulation is very difficult. Part of that is that you're undergoing significant physical changes. So you've got growth spurts, you've got puberty hormone surges, and to top it all off just for funsies, your sleep patterns actually change. We know this, and they change in a manner that does not really coincide with what society is expecting you to do. So you want to sleep in later because that's how your sleep pattern has changed, and now you have to get on the bus the earliest. So, and then it is also a time, though, of significant growth. And usually by the end of adolescence, after you've passed all of that pain, you have significant brain maturation, and their brains definitely look more like an adult brain, especially in your prefrontal cortex, which really kind of amps up development in your teens and going into your young adulthood. So you get more of the self-awareness and also the self-regulation aspect. You might start those skills when you're younger, obviously, but you really start to be able to put those into the social context. And we'll talk a little bit more about how social integration is so important for teens, and that's part of why it's a time of conflict with parents. Yep, make it all up there. So definitely there are some actual neurochemical reasons for why teenagers are kind of struggling a little bit more with emotional intelligence at times. And so they are also in studies shown to be much more emotionally reactive. So there are two systems in your body that are sort of stress responders. One's your sympathetic division of your autonomic nervous, and most people hear that as fight or flight. That's how we talk about it, fight or flight, fight or flight. So when something happens to a teenager and they explode, part of it is because they're more, like they get activated much more than your kids do and you do as an adult. Something about how their brain is and how they're developing. As well as your HPA axis, which is like your stress response. So it's like cortisol and that sort of thing. It's been found that in teenagers, basically they have more activation than kids as well as adults. And I think part of it is because of the puberty hormones. So they're just, this just made me feel really bad for teenagers. And then they also are really, really sensitive to social evaluation. This becomes a time when they don't really care so much what you think, even though if you had like a really good relationship, it becomes all about their peers. And that's because they're starting to, in their development, start to individuate, start to become their own person away from their family. And, ultimately the successful transition to adulthood means leaving your family and starting your own, right? And so that's part of why it's so important to them. But this also comes at a time when middle school is really hard. I hear all of these stories about how mean, especially middle school girls are, because in my population, I see a lot of adolescent girls. And this is a time when social acceptance is so important, and it's also tied into all of this nuance that a lot of folks kind of struggle with. So they're much more emotionally reactive. Then they're also experiencing much more intense emotions. So this is both positive and negative. So the emotions they experience as a part of being much more emotionally reactive also are higher. So they have that peak really quickly, much higher, and both being happy and being sad or down, or angry, or whatever emotion it is. And so that's why a lot of people will kind of talk about my teenager is bipolar. And you're right, they're definitely emotionally reactive, they're swinging up and down. Sometimes, there's a true underlying bipolar disorder there. And I always tell parents, like, if this is bipolar disorder, it will declare itself. But when kids have mood swings within a day, sometimes that's just their poor brain is trying to adjust to the hormones and everything going on around them. Plus they haven't gotten good sleep because they want to stay up until 3 a.m. naturally, and then they have to wake up at 6 for school. So it's just like we're setting them up for failure. The other thing that has come out in the research studies is that adolescents do seem to seek out more negative emotions at the expense of positive emotions. So why would someone do that? Why do teenagers want to feel miserable, right? So the research has actually shown that part of how they bond with peers and get that social acceptance is by doing something called co-rumination. So especially among adolescent females, it leads to better connection, including better quality of friendships. So if my mom's fighting with me and I make the situation worse, and all of this is not really conscious. This is not like something they're thinking about, but what we've realized, like what would be the reward, right? What's the candy in feeling sad all the time and feeling miserable? Well, it's that I can go to school and be like, let me tell you what my mom did last night. And then I did this. And then you and I become best friends because like, well, my mom. And so that is part of what's going on in that social transaction. Next, they're also really struggling to regulate their emotions because the front of your brain is kind of the part of your brain that really inhibits responses. And so it kind of talks you out of screaming at your partner, you know, when you're an adult, or talks you out of making an impulsive purchase if you're also an adult. But teenagers, while it's starting to mature, it hasn't matured yet. And so this is the time when it's going to happen slowly but surely, and usually by the end of adolescence, they do have improved cognitive control. So they're definitely more sophisticated than children in that way, but it's not yet to the level of adulthood. They also remain much less likely to distract themselves to avoid emotional distress, and they're much more likely to ruminate, like we discussed before, on negative things and negative stress as compared to children. So in some ways, they're able to inhibit better and display more emotion regulation. But then in other ways, they're also more likely to sit there and keep themselves miserable. So poor teenagers. So that's why I think with adolescence, if you know we're going to talk about books, it's a little bit more structured and intentional, and it almost fits this process that we call bibliotherapy that sometimes we use in psychotherapy with patients, or even like librarians do it with like a curriculum, or school psychologists, that sort of thing. So the process, and it's sort of the same process that happens in younger kids, mostly with the identification piece, but with teens, you start to go a lot deeper. So the first part is identifying. So in reading the book, you recognize the thoughts and behaviors of others and kind of connect that with the characters. And then you also identify yourself in the characters and in the life that they're living and in the problems that they have. And then the next step after that is to get some sort of catharsis and some sort of release in response to the story. So you experience some sort of emotional connection with that character. And it doesn't always have to be overt, like you bawl, although I'm one of those people that will be on the plane, like reading a book and be like, oh, so sad. But they don't necessarily have to bawl or experience like a great emotional release in that way, but it's just much more so like letting that emotion come out of themselves and bringing attention to it instead of avoiding it. The next step below that is really developing insight into, this is a problem in my life, and maybe the character solved the problem in one particular way that was really helpful to them, and maybe I could try that. Or the character's friend did this, or the character did this and it definitely didn't work, so maybe I shouldn't do that. And then, so this is a good, like Jane was saying, a good time to kind of play around in a safe, fantasy place about what this could look like and try on different solutions. And then universalization, basically the connection that I'm not alone in the world, that I'm not the only person that has ever lost their grandfather or lost their father or been adopted. I'm not the only person who's had autism. I'm not the only person who has bipolar disorder. And this process you can use in adults as well. And I often use it with the teens when I'm working with them in a more clinical way. So there are some considerations, though, that you have to make with this. And we were talking a little bit about this at the beginning, and I hope that we can get into it in the discussion. But there are some risks. So, excuse me. So if students or, your sons and daughters project their own motives onto characters, they might reinforce their own incorrect beliefs. Like they might say like, oh, this happened and they did this, and they were successful because they manipulated, or because they did drugs and their anxiety got better, And so you can put your own spin on things. And so when you're reading these books, sometimes you have to really read them with a lens of, how will a teenager see this? And then if there is any maladaptive behavior in there, especially with two specific areas, self-injury and eating disorders, then we know that sometimes that becomes a real, for some reason, those two things, those two target it becomes competition. And so those are two things that I've definitely put a little asterisk by, like, if we're gonna use a book to talk about that with our teens, or a TV series or anything, really be ready to address this idealization of this maladaptive behavior and being like, well, it's my coping skill, it's my way, it's how I choose to be in control, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Next. So yeah, so some topics, especially if they can not only be idealized, but they can also be triggering. So hopefully we'll get into this in the discussion at the end, but if someone is having a period of instability, I would definitely, or they're actively cutting or actively suicidal, that's not the time to be reading about, you know, oh, this character was doing it in just like a home setting. I think it would definitely probably be a good idea to have the therapist or the doctor aware and to kind of be able to in that particular situation, because especially the eating disorders part, those books tend to and shows tend to just basically trigger like a competition, and so that won't be good. And then the suicide and self-harm, you know, there have been, you know, there's 13 Reasons Why, which hopefully we can talk about. There have been studies that have shown talking about suicide does not make someone more likely to commit suicide, right? So if you talk to your teenager about suicide, that doesn't mean they're going to all of a sudden come up with the idea to kill themselves. But if it's there, they're going to be able to talk about it with you because you brought it up, and hopefully it's a safe place. But sometimes when things are written about in literature or portrayed on screen or even talked about in the news, in the media, we know that there are certain things that trigger more suicides. And that actually did happen with 13 Reasons Why. And part of it was thought to be related to sort of this like glorifying and idealizing. And so that's definitely, I think, hopefully an area where we can definitely get into some discussion, because I do think that some people said, oh no, well, this was really helpful for me to talk about with my mom, with my dad. And then there was also a client that I was in training with Dr. T, and she's in the partial hospital program. She's there for self-injury and suicide, and she's reading 13 Reasons Why on like her break time. And I'm like, this, I don't know, this just doesn't seem like a great idea. And this was before the TV series came out. So next slide. So yes, definitely this doesn't replace therapy or other mental health interventions. So the key here is using stories to discuss emotions, because teens, maybe they don't necessarily love reading. If you have an avid reader and they will read books with you and talk and you guys have that bond and that relationship, then definitely books are the way to go. You know, getting a book, reading it together, talking about it. You can also even try audiobooks for those who are more reluctant readers, or maybe those who have difficulty with focus and attention. Sometimes I know what people do is they listen to the audiobook while sort of reading to really engage them. There are also shorter things like podcasts that you might be able to find, or TED Talks, or even like TV series. So like Brené Brown has great talks on empathy, and they're 20 minutes, and they're really engaging and really interesting. TV series, actually on Netflix, there's a TV series that I actually recommend to a lot of my kids who I think are like on the autism spectrum and really high functioning, and like kind of questioning it. I'm like, all right, so there's this series called Atypical, like sit down and have a, like, you just watch one episode and you tell me if anything that you identify with that character at all. Or if parents are kind of wondering if I'm like, I think he's got Asperger's, and they're like, no, he's really smart. I'm like, well, I'm not saying he's dumb. I'm saying that his brain processes things differently. Here, like, do you like to read? No? Okay. You like to watch TV? Netflix. Atypical if you've got it, right? And there are other TV series that have come about as well. Like I was talking to Dr. T about, Never Have I Ever is a recent series. And it's, I think, one like a really culturally accurate representation, because I know a lot of psychiatrists have been talking about what it's like to struggle with grief, also as a member of the Asian American community in some of our groups. So these things can really start discussions. It doesn't necessarily always have to be a book. I think what's more important is the story that they can connect with. So a couple of book recommendations that are approved by our librarian, and your librarian locally will be one of your best resources. So definitely when we did this presentation in Pittsburgh, Megan was amazing and really helpful. And then we're really lucky to have Erin on the call as well. But this book is going to become a major motion picture. So maybe if your kid likes movies too, you can kind of pull it into there. And this is a review that I saw, basically the description on Amazon, because full disclosure, I haven't had the chance to read this particular book yet. But it says there's a lot of self-deprecating humor about the experience of depression and anxiety for the teen protagonist. And it talks about that was the other thing when I was asking Erin for book recommendations. I said I wanted to be able to talk about really heavy stuff, but not be triggering or upsetting or be like a real downer. I wanted to have a positive ending and hopefully like a positive twist to the story, but not in like an overly optimistic way. So that balance, I think the best person to ask is going to be your young adult librarian in the local library. So this was one of the recommendations for depression anxiety. It's Dr. Bird's Advice for Sad Poets. Then Finding Perfect is a great representation of OCD. And you can't really tell on the picture, but in the background of the book cover is like a number of numbers, because that's also part of her compulsions and obsessions. So 12-year-old Molly is, to 12-year-old Molly Nathan's, perfect is the number 4, the tip of a newly sharpened number 2 pencil, a crisp white pad of paper, and her neatly aligned glass animal figures. What's not perfect is Molly's mother leaving to take a faraway job with the promise of coming back in 1 year. Molly knows that promises are sometimes broken, so she hatches a plan to bring her mother home. Win the Lakeville Middle School Poetry Slam contest. The winner is honored at a fancy banquet with white tablecloths. Molly is sure that her mom would never miss that, right? But as time passes, writing and reciting slam poetry become actually harder. Actually, everything becomes harder as new habits appear, and counting, cleaning, and organizing are not even enough to keep Molly's world from spinning out of control. In this fresh voice debut novel, one girl learns there's no such thing as perfect. So that one is about OCD, but it also talks a little bit about, obviously, a parent relationship here, and mom is away for her job. And kind of, I think part of it is the loss that happens there and as she adjusts to it. So this next one is actually somewhat of an anthology. There's 33 stories here from different folks. Some of the names, I don't know if you can necessarily see them, but like Nancy Kerrigan's on there, Amy Reed. So there's other folks on there, and it's really their stories, like a collection of short stories / essays. So that might be another good way to get teens into it. And they discuss all different experiences with mental health. So there's 33 actors, athletes, writers, and artists offer essays, lists, comics, and illustrations that explore a wide range of topics about their personal experiences with mental illness. So that should be again, hopefully something that we can talk a little bit more about if any of you guys have experience with that particular book as well. And then this last one is really about PTSD. So Ghost wants to be the fastest sprinter on his middle school track team, but his past is ending up slowing him down. So there's 4 kids with different backgrounds coming onto this team. They're clashing, but they're actually chosen for an elite team that can qualify them for Junior Olympics if they can get that together. Ghost is really naturally talented at running, but he has no formal training, and says if he could stay on track literally and figuratively, he could be the best sprinter in the city. But he's been running for the wrong reasons. It all started with running away from his father, who, when Ghost was a very little boy, chased him and his mother through their apartment and then down the street with a loaded gun, aiming to kill. Since then, Ghost has been the one causing the problems and running away from them, until he meets Coach, an ex-Olympic medalist who blew his own shot at success by using drugs, and who's determined to keep other kids from blowing their shots at life. So that book also won a number of awards and has been on a number of bestseller lists. So those were the ones that definitely Erin recommended very highly and very strongly. The other thing about adolescents is if you're not able, if they're not at a point where they want to talk to you about it, talking to a therapist about it might be a good idea. But the other thing is you really just want them to reflect on it. And so you can, if they like to journal, they like to write, that's another thing that you can do. And so these are some writing prompts that Erin's going to put up both on her website, but they're also on the handout that will get mailed to you, to kind of get them writing about some of the things that they've read about. And so we can talk more about that. But it's something that if you encourage kids to kind of, and adolescents to reflect on, like even in our treatment facility, they have journals, and this is something that we can give them creative writing prompts and say, like, you know, write a letter to your future self about, you know, how you look back on this treatment experience. Maybe they're snarky and they're like, this was torture, I was in jail. Or maybe they go, you know, future self, like, you know, it's hard now, but, you know, and so it really depends kind of on where they are in their own recovery. But this can also be something that's really cathartic for them and really healing. So reading and writing. So there are some resources that we want to share with you. So there's this particular psychiatrist, she works in Massachusetts, and she has a website. It's Marissa Mendel, MD. She has bibliotherapy books for children, and they're classified according to basically diagnosis or disorder. So like for if parents are splitting or divorcing, there's a book called Two Homes. Jane and I both love My Mouth is a Volcano for ADHD. There's a trauma book called A Terrible Thing Happened, where they talk about this terrible thing that happened, but they never talk about what that thing is. Oh, there we go. Jane's got it. She's showing the picture of it. And so Jane, actually, one of the other training opportunities she had was with Judy Cohen, who does TF-CBT, so trauma-focused CBT. And so you can really pull these things into therapy, but also even at home if kids are having difficulty with certain emotions and struggling. For separation anxiety, there's the Kissing Hand, which we did make questions for and is one of the bookmarks. And basically it's, I love raccoons. I'm obsessed with them. I call them trash pandas, but it's this little raccoon who's really struggling to go to school because he misses mom. And then perfectionism, there's a book as well called A Perfectly Messed Up Story. So she's got a lot more on there as well. You know, why reinvent the wheel? Like she's already kind of got that there as a resource. So that's definitely something that if you're looking for books to share with your kids or even with clients that you work with on certain topics, that would be a place to start. And then if you're looking for something in particular that's not there, definitely reach out to your local librarian or even to Dr. Phelps-Tschang or myself, or hopefully Erin and Dr. T would be open for that as well. Next slide.
Yeah, but what if you have somebody that's like all of those?
Yeah, they read all
the books.
You just make them just read all the books. Some of these books are really short and really quick reads. And most of them are very easy reads when I've read them. So definitely for the younger kids, but even for the teens as well. Mm-hmm. None of this is like a textbook. All right, so we're gonna wrap it up now and then get to discussion and questions. So here we go. So I always like to wrap up all of my presentations, as Donna probably knows because she attended my presentation at CFB, with going over the objectives and did we basically achieve them, and hopefully we did. So being able to identify any of the milestones in emotional intelligence. So, you know, this is a really complicated diagram like Jane had talked about before, but basically I think it makes a lot of sense. You become aware of your emotions, you start to understand them. You start to be able to communicate them to other people. Then you can tell the difference between what you're showing people and what you're experiencing inside. You're starting to kind of manage your emotions and cope with it. And then realize that your ability to manage or not manage your emotions is affecting people around you and your relationships, your friendships. And then really developing, I think we do this, I mean, all of these things are things that even us as adults, I'm sure, can talk about experiences where we've struggled or there's been a time where our emotional communication broke down. And so it's definitely not a linear thing. It's something that kind of, you know, you can fall back and forth on, but you eventually hopefully gain the emotional self-efficacy and you're just like perfect all of a sudden, like Buddha. Just kidding.
I would actually recommend to look at the one that's maybe a little bit more simple, that's mapped onto ages, and that maybe further help us in delineating the age plus the developmental milestone along with emotional intelligence. The piece somebody else said, every time I've given this presentation, I've had people ask me, like, so what happens when I haven't gotten, like, my kid hasn't done this very well, but then like they're older and like, what do I do? Should I work on the current one? And you know, typically my recommendation is always about, just because you, like Monique was saying, just because you're a certain age doesn't mean that you're developmentally ready to do all the tasks that's within that age. So I mean, as we know that when kiddos struggle with anxiety, depression, any type of or trauma, any disruptions in their development can also, their actual development can actually be delayed. So just aware that when you have kids in your care, you may have to play catch up and try to figure out where they are emotional intelligence wise, and kind of work from that point on, instead of asking them to do something that may be consistent with their age, but not consistent with their developmental milestone.
Right, exactly. Second objective, to be able to identify at least 3, possibly more books that you could use to do this. You'll have a list of 9 with actual questions to read along with your younger kids, and then hopefully you've got a couple places to start as well for the teenagers, and a couple ideas about maybe even TV series and that sort of thing. Next. Be able to feel comfortable starting to talk about emotions in an age-appropriate and developmentally appropriate way. Not sitting your teenager down to read, you know, My Mouth is a Volcano, but feeling comfortable to be able to talk about it even with young ones. Because when Jane first approached me with this, I was like, wait, what? We're going to talk to like Scott about feelings? I was like, does Scott know what feelings are? So, you know, definitely I was uncomfortable with the idea at first even. So feeling more comfortable being able to practice it, something. And then finally, being able to identify some resources. So this graphic on the right is going to be up on Erin's website, as well as in a handout that you're going to get. And the handout is on the left with the link to the Google Drive, as well as Marissa Mendel's website. Erin's article that I actually happened upon when I was doing my research, and that's how I reached out to her, and I'm so glad I did, is also on there from the School Librarian Journal. And then the Carnegie Library in Pittsburgh, sorry to keep mentioning Pittsburgh, but that's where we trained. We lived there for 5 years. They have also some book lists as well. So, all right, so hopefully we can do some discussion and questions, and I'll let Donna moderate on this part. Sure. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you all. That was really great information. I was thrilled with all of that. First question that popped up from Nilda is, are there recommendations of books in other languages like Spanish for children coming from other countries who are in the process of assimilation and acculturation, even to facilitate the parent and child relationship, and parents can be doing some of the reading?
So I know a lot, and hopefully Erin, maybe, I don't know, you deal more with older kiddos, but I know a lot of the books that we did, Jane and I together, that we made the bookmarks for, they're available in Spanish versions as well. And I know this only because my nieces are bilingual. They speak Spanish and English. And so that was something that I kind of looked into for them. But I don't, full disclosure, I don't speak another language. Jane speaks Taiwanese or Chinese, right? And so she knows books in Chinese, but I don't. So I don't know if anyone else knows any other resources, but I know a lot of the books for the younger kids are available in Spanish as well.
Yeah, I think so. Also, depending on your library, some libraries will have bilingual collections or collections in a different language depending on their community demographics.
Yeah.
So it's definitely worth checking. Right now in children's publishing, there are a lot of great books that have English and Spanish side by side on the page, which is really cool. I don't have a list right now of titles, but I'm happy to provide that. I can do a little digging because that's my job as a librarian. We did recently do that for a patron, so I know I already have a lot of it somewhere. So I can, are we looking at picture book age for that?
I'm not sure. Do you have particular ages in mind for those books, Grizel?
She's muted right now. Let's see.
I think she might have been like also eating dinner / making dinner.
Did someone mention me?
Yeah, we were wondering if you had a particular age you wanted. We were making our librarian work for you. She's gonna look up specific books.
Actually, it's funny because as we were speaking, my sister was calling my name because someone was at the door and they were doing a delivery of, I think, a book. I've been actually searching for books in Spanish for my sister. She's special adult. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to encourage her to use her reading skills, but since she has a CNA, the CNA reads to her. And I discovered some books to address issues of special needs, like you're different, or explain autism. So that's why I was asking. I didn't come across those that speak that much about emotional issues, but see this one I just got that's called ¿Qué cosas dice mi abuela? What things my grandma talks about. So different kinds of books that facilitate the conversation and a topic at hand. So that's why, and being bilingual myself and knowing that in Osceola, more than 50% of the population speaks Spanish, and we have folks coming from Venezuela and other countries whose the assimilation process is yet not there that much.
Yeah.
I wanted to see if we could identify some books that speak to the issue of mental health. That's why I was asking.
No, that's a great question.
It's expensive, but it's good that you said what you said about checking with the librarian, because sometimes we don't know and they might have books, or they're willing to actually purchase it and have it within their library.
Right, yeah. A lot of places will take a purchase request as long as they think that it's going to be taken out widely by others. So if there's a particular title you like, you can do a purchase request. But I'd say probably it would be a great idea to ask, because they might have some wonderful, like a list already prepared. I know there's a lot of picture books right now that have the Spanish and the English together. I'm trying to think of one that has a mental health theme. It's not springing to mind, but I'll definitely look.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
The next question comes from Gretchen, and she wants to know if there's a book for a teen who has lost his mother. He's doing okay, but as grandparents, they're concerned.
That's a good question.
That's a very nice question. I don't know of any.
I mean,
so I know on Marissa Mandela's website, there's a section where it deals with like parents with mental illness.
Right.
And I feel like, so the Netflix series Never Have I Ever, the main character is a really snarky teenager who has lost her father suddenly. So that might be, if he wanted to like kind of watch a series, that might potentially be a place to start that I can think of off the top of my head. I feel like there's definitely books dealing with grief.
There are.
Yeah, that I'm not thinking of right now.
Okay.
Let me do a quick Dr. Google search.
There you go. That's always a good one.
Yeah. Books for grief, the loss of parent.
And while she's doing that, I'm going to throw out one more question that is a 15-year-old boy whose it's a hard home life. Both parents are struggling themselves, and as an aunt, she's looking for resources, books that may help him because he's struggling. And now with he was seeing a school counselor, but now with being homeschooled, with the schools being closed, he's lost that resource that was out there. So dealing with home life, a bad home life, where he won't have his parents supporting him as he's reading these books.
What, if you know a little bit more about the home life, what is it in particular? Do you know if it's like substance abuse or like abuse, like domestic violence?
Or depression or anxiety?
Yeah, or parents have schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, because there are specific books about dealing with parents who are struggling with certain things.
Okay. All right.
Did you want me to say
Yes.
what it was, Donna?
Yes, if you could, Angelique, that would be great.
It's a long story. Yeah, his mom, that's actually how I got connected with you guys years ago. His mom is mental illness and substance abuse. And then a couple years ago, she had a brain hemorrhage. She almost died. He's pretty much been kind of raised here and there just with the family taking care of him. But now he's in with his dad, and his situation with his dad is really no better because there's a house full of people and no attention on him. His dad has a new relationship with a woman with kids from, so he's just kind of on his own. And, myself and my mom and my dad take an interest in him, but his dad doesn't really let us see him. So he's just pretty much in his room all the time by himself, nobody really watching him. And he's a teenager, he's got all these feelings and emotions, but no one to really talk to him about these things, and just such a traumatic past that I just don't know what's going to happen with him, a lot.
Yeah.
So he was enjoying talking to his counselor, and he said he likes talking to me, but he's almost 15-year-old boy. So he's
right.
Just don't know what to do for him, but he was telling me about a movie he liked and a book he liked, so he might be up for watching or reading something.
Yeah. And his counselor is not willing to do or not able to do video visits?
I don't know that he's had any conversations with her since school was out. I don't know that he knows how to get a hold of her.
If they're school counselors, they're really tied to the schools, and so I don't think they're doing anything private outside of being in that school setting. So
yeah,
that becomes
my understanding of school counselors is that the school has contracted with these agencies to provide mental health treatment while the schools are still open. So right now, the schools may be closed, but distance learning is continuing. And my understanding is that these providers are still available till the schools actually close for the summer to provide care. So you may want to reach out to the school district and talk to the guidance counselor and see what resources there are. Sometimes the guidance counselors themselves talk to the students and provide some support because that's their role, and see what else they can do in terms of connecting them to things.
Okay, thank you.
And Angelique, I work for the school district here in Osceola County, and the social workers are still connecting with families and holding conversations over the phone or via Zoom, like Dr. Tumuluru.
Yes,
Sorry.
Dr. T.
We just call her Dr. T.
That's right, short for Dr. T. Check with the school district. Is it Orange County? Because I think it's similar to Osceola. They have the same.
He's in ninth grade. It's a Popka, so I think it's.
Yeah, that's Orange County.
Orange. Okay.
That's still Orange County. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Somebody might not have typed something in, but if you have something to say, just put your hand up. Mary Pat?
Yes, and it kind of ties in with what Angelique was bringing out. And I think for some of us, one of the barriers is that we don't have legal rights as an aunt or as a grandparent or things like that. So some of the resources that are out there in the schools may not be available to us, or the counselors and that may not speak with us because of that situation. So mine kind of ties in a little bit when you have a small amount of time with your children, that whether it be your grandchild or your nephew or things like that, how can you incorporate a lot of this when your time is limited with them? You might see them once a month, maybe for a day or things like that. Is it possible to reach them in small amounts of this, even though we may not have the time to read books? And also along with that, if you have different age groups, what we saw in the video was so wonderful, but if you have grandchildren of different ages and you've got a short amount of time, are you able to accomplish much when you have to do all of them together at the same time? Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
So sure. I'm happy to chime in a little bit, just because I typically, I lead groups for these things. And granted that they're, in a kindergarten classroom, they would be a little bit more developmentally the same, but the truth is that you can do this in a varied age groups together. You can have an older kid read to a younger kid and run it like a story time. I don't know exactly what age range you're talking about. If they're at an age where they like storybooks, you can certainly engage in an older child reading to the younger child, and you chime in with the discussion questions, because it's like there isn't a lot of time necessarily to read like a full textbook book, but even little stories like Harold and his purple crayon, which just happens to be one of my favorite. I mean, there are different emotions in there, where, you know, he left a very deserving porcupine, I think, to eat all of his pie, and discussing about what does it mean to be deserving, or when he was lost, he asked for directions from a policeman. What might that feel like? And how can you tell whether, I mean, there are little tricks and tips about how to get into this type of discussion. And typically the question stems I try to think of is what or how, and would be like, how would you feel if you were this character? What might you be thinking in that moment? What might you be feeling in that moment? How would other people tell that you're thinking or feeling this way? Or if you were this character's friends, how might you help this character, you know, through this trouble? So really encouraging empathy. So essentially consciously thinking through at which age and what are the skills that you're trying to enforce. Mm-hmm. And you can go through this exercise for yourself, and also if we're able to be conscientious about what questions we're asking, what skills we're reinforcing, it really builds, even if you're seeing somebody once a month.
Okay.
The other thing you could do as a grandparent or an aunt, when there are different ages and they're all with you, is to actually spend time with them, to provide them with some amount of normalcy in their life, by just playing even a board game with them. Right. That increases, that shows them how to share and play with each other, and then how are things going? having some normalcy in their life, something that they wouldn't normally do, that you would be able to do for them, would also give them some respite from whatever it is that they're experiencing. Because when they're seeing you so briefly and for such a short period of time, they're also looking for some relief. And you want to provide them, because you want to support them, but you don't know what to do. At the same time, providing them with some relief, where it is sort of normal to come home and have cookies and milk and play a board game, watch some cartoons, and not worry about anything. So it's like a little island where they could come,
like
a safe haven, like a safe place. And once you create that kind of a safe place for them, they're more than likely to come to you and talk to you about things. And that may promote some discussion by itself, where they feel like you're going to be an adult who can you can talk to without really feeling like you're going to tell on them or do something to them. So you don't necessarily have to do a whole lot or feel upset or beat yourself up because you're not doing more, but just creating something that you would do anyway is in itself a support.
Yes, thank you.
Eric, one more question. Yep.
Yeah, I've just got a couple things. I did think of a grief book, you guys, if you hadn't thought of this one, Bridge to Terabithia.
Yes.
Oh, look at everybody. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it did hit me like 2/3 of the way through that.
Yes.
One of my favorites.
Mm-hmm.
I do have to say, as a Stephen King fan, there's no way I'm not going to mention about a librarian from Derry. Come on. If you don't know what that is, then you'll have to watch it.
Oh no.
No.
Too scary.
My question is on the stages. The folks in my life are kind of on the edge of that stages. Are there anything that is somebody that learns how to emotionally communicate better, kind of at the edge of that? Do you have any sort of references on that might be a good story of people that connect, whether they're teenagers or adults?
So
you can get it back to
older folks, like
get it to me
like
later.
Teenagers or
adults?
I don't know. I'm thinking like a teenager to connect with grandma, stages of life kind of thing. I don't know, something along those lines. Just think about it. Email me later. You have my email. If you come with an moment like I had, just email it to me. But I've got some people I think that could benefit from that.
Okay.
All right. I think we're just about at that 8 o'clock time.
Right on
So
time.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Thank you to each and every one of the presenters. It was amazing. Yay. I really appreciate it. I know that even though we were gearing to children and teens, I was like, well, this could work for all of us, and I was going through that and thinking how important this is for every one of us, not just our kiddos. And so I think that was really important. I thank you for all taking your time. We have recorded this, so we will post that link and I will get it out to you as presenters. And we will also post the handouts that were put together so that you will all be able to get those. They will be on our website. I know a lot of you in here, so I can shoot that email out to you anyways, but we'll make sure it's out there. And if you share this with someone else and they need the information, please have them call our office and we can get them anything else they need. So again, appreciate each and every one of you. So thank you so much for this valuable
Thank you for
information.
allowing this opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank
Very
you.
much.
Everybody stay safe.
Keep doing what you're doing.
That's
Thank
right.
you.